Namaste. This is a bhakti evening. We started with kirtan, which you heard. Then we get together, that's satsang, that's pretty bhakti. We're going to discuss Hanuman, that's pretty bhakti. And service, that's very bhakti. Then we are going to discuss Guru Kripa, which is the grace of the Guru. That is bhakti. Bhakti, for those of you that don't know, is going towards the one with the heart. Oh. Oh. Then we want to discuss love, the path of love. That is certainly bhakti. So all these components are bhakti. It's a path of the heart. Joining me is my guru brother, Larry Brilliant, and his wife there, Girija, and she's a guru's sister. Let's start with Maharaji, our guru. He's here now. You know, my first meeting with Maharaji was really the whole thing. I came to him being a Buddhist, and I didn't believe in gurus and all that crap. The Hindus gave me oof. I mean, they poster art and loudspeakers in the just all that. So I came to him. I was really I was the passenger in a car. I'll tell you exactly what happened. This fellow I was working with, walking around India visiting Buddhist temples. He needed to go see his guru because he had a letter from the Indian government had said he had to go out of India. So he took me along because I had control of a Land Rover that belonged to another friend of mine. And we went up to the mountains, and we were about one day before meeting the guru. I was staying in a bedroom, and I needed to go to the bathroom, and I went out to the outhouse, and I was going along, and the stars were very bright. And they were so near and so bright. And I thought about my mother. She had died 6 months earlier. I don't know why I thought about my mother. I used to be a psychologist, so I was a Freudian, which I was thinking about my mother on the path to the outhouse, which for a Freudian has, oh boy, a rich, but it was a very spiritual thing, which I had never had from my mother. And then went back to bed, and I didn't tell anybody about this. So the next day we went to the guru. We parked in front of a little temple, and there were maybe 20 people around, and they were all yelling. And this fellow I was with, he understood Hindi and spoke Hindi. And they were all talking, and I was sort of just watching. And the fellow got out of the Land Rover, and he said, "Do you want to go up to see the guru?" And I started, "No, thank you, I don't, God, no." So he went lopping up in a path up a long hill. And they left me with the Land Rover and the crowd. Well, as he disappeared, the crowd turned hostile. because I'm not going up to the guru, I guess. And I was thinking, they have in mind stealing the Land Rover. I better stay and sit and watch the Land Rover. And they yelled and yelled and yelled. So their yelling plus my curiosity got me to get up and start up the hill. And I took a last look at the Land Rover. And I started up the hill. And as I came up a clearing, there was a beautiful tree, and sitting under the tree was a man with a blanket, an older man, and about 30 people sitting around him, all dressed in white. So I immediately figured, it's a cult. And I stopped and waited, and I just looked on. And this man was the blanket. He was talking to somebody, and he started, and he pointed at me, and he spoke. And I couldn't understand him. And I put my hands in my pockets, so I wasn't going to pranam or anything like that. And he said, "Did you come in a big car?" I said, "Yes." So he said to me, "Tell me, would you give it to me?" This is just what I see. They're all the same. Already wants my car. And everybody's laughing at me. And he's laughing. I said, "Well, it's somebody else's owned the Land Rover, but maybe, yeah." He said, "Did you make a lot of money in America?" "Yes." "Would you buy a car like that for me?" I'm getting red and, I'm really uncomfortable. And I said, "Well, maybe." The fellow that came up the bone with me was doing Danda Pranam, is laying on his belly, and he jumped up and he said, "Maharaji, if you want the car, it's yours." Wow, I'm just getting, So he said, take them down to the temple and give them food. We were given big plates of food. And then we came back up the hill, and he says to me, come, you sit here. I'm right in the grass there. And he said, you were thinking about your mother last night. Wow. That's very unusual. I was a psychologist, and I've studied cognitive psychology. We can't do any of that. I said, yes, that's right. He was breaking my mind open, what he was doing. And then he said, you sit here, and then he went to talk to other people. And I looked down at the grass, and what I think, oh my gosh. If he read that thought, he read all the, oh my God. Oi, oi, you know, you've got little things, you know, everybody has got a few, you know. Oh, and I kept adding them up, you know, oh, please, oh, God. And I was very embarrassed. And I looked up, and his eyes were about here. And he looked directly into my eyes with unconditional love. With unconditional love. It was the first time I'd ever experienced unconditional love. Never in my life, because your mother and father will love you if you're a good boy, and everybody loves you if you're good, and you don't kill them and stuff like that. But he wasn't, he didn't care about anything. He was just, I love you. And that opened me to unconditional love. And what I said to myself, I'm home. I'm home. Home in my heart. He transferred my identity from my ego to my real self, just by looking at it with love. That was my first experience. And of course, I was ripe. I just hadn't come from being a psychologist. I had been experimenting with psychedelic chemicals. I've recognized that space in my own heart. So as I was leaving, he said to me, when I left to come back to America, he said to me, don't tell anybody about me. Can you imagine, don't tell anybody? I mean, you've got something, no, I can't tell you about this. So I came back to India in 2 years from then. He said, you can stay in America for 2 years. And he said, write a book. No, that isn't what he said. He said, he says, I'll give you blessings for a book. He had never allowed anybody to write about him. I said, well, they said his blessing was Ashirvad, meaning blessing. He wanted Ashirvad for your book. So I did 2 questions. What does Ashirvad mean? And what book? And I came back to New York and I wrote Be Here Now. And Be Here Now touched the souls of millions of people. It was his book. That's my story.
Not fair.
This is, should I give you a long introduction?
Short. Short. None.
It's hard for me to, but I won't. Larry, brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Did you have a question?
I'd like to have, did you came up upon Maharaji because Girij brought you back. You were been with the hog farm. The hog farm is a, what should it call it? Huh? A commune in the 60s. And you came back and met Maharaji. What happened at that meeting?
He told me he was going to ask that question, so I've had some time to prepare. I had exactly the same experience you had, except I had a red Mustang convertible. Otherwise, they're... So, Girij and I were living in San Francisco, and I was an intern. And I only had 1 day off a week, and we worked pretty hard. Girij was a probation officer, and I was an intern. And I had Thursday nights off. And Ramdas, you came back from India, and you hadn't yet written Be Here Now. And one of the things that you did to collect experiences and support for writing Be Here Now was that every Thursday night, for 3 nights, you spoke at the Unitarian Church on Guff in San Francisco. So every Thursday night, George and I went. Is this okay? Can you hear me? Closer? So every Thursday night, we went to hear Ram Dass, and he came back from India, and he had a searchlight in the middle of his forehead. How many of you have experienced that searchlight in the middle of his forehead? It's okay. We're here sort of because we've all experienced that searchlight in the middle of your forehead. And we knew that there was a guru somewhere, but you had been made to pledge that you wouldn't talk about him. But everything that you said seemed to indicate that we should come and find someone. But our life didn't work in that direction. George and I acted in a movie called The Medicine Ball Caravan, and I just saw Kit here. I don't know if he's still here, but Kit was in that movie too. We're just reconnecting after about 40 years. It was a terrible movie. Awful, wasn't it? And that movie took us, we were doing rock and roll shows with a bunch of bands, and I was a rock doc. And it ended with a Pearl Jam concert in Canterbury. And about 40 of us decided that we liked living on buses and making music, and we bought 2 buses, and we drove from Canterbury, England to Kathmandu. And it took us about 2 years, and 40 hippies living together on 2 buses, and there's a story there, or 2. And we got to New Delhi, and we did what everybody did when they got to a different country in those days, which is we went to the American Express office to get our mail. And we parked the buses in Connaught Circus. It was a bit of a circus. And Wavy Gravy went out of the bus in full regalia, his day costume, and he went into American Express, and who did he stand behind in line getting his mail but Ram Dass. And Ram Dass, everybody got a little closer. Ram Dass knew Wavy, Wavy knew Ram Dass, and they went to get their mail, and Ram Dass got his mail, and it happened to be one of the first copies of Be Here Now. Now, if I had written a book and I had been in India and I had gone to the American Express office and I had opened up my mail and there was a proof of my book, I would have kept it pretty close to me and hidden it and gone away to read it. But what Ram Dass did, pretty typically, was he turned around and wrote in it, "To Wavy Gravy and family, the Hanumans of the 60s. And we took that book and we sat in our bus and we took turns reading it, and we were all transfixed. And none of us were ever the same. And we stayed in India for a while and went and trekked in Nepal, and Wavy got sick, and he had to go back to the United States. And Girij and I had a conversation. She loved India. She wanted to go find Maharaji. We didn't know how to find him. I wanted to go back and take care of Wavy. So I went back to the States, and she stayed in India. And the next 6 months were some of the hardest months of my life. She was in India, and I was in the States. And every once in a while, we would get into these embarrassing moments, like I was at my mother's house in Cleveland, Ohio, and Girij sent a telegram, "Living with Maharaji." And my mother got it and said, "Your wife is living with another man. You better do something about this." And then just before Christmas, a war broke out between India and Pakistan. And they were bombing, you may know, Agra near the Taj Mahal, and it was not safe. And Maharaji suggested that people go back, and he told Girija to go back and get the doctor. And so she called me and said, "I'll come back on condition you come with me." And that was an interesting conversation. But at the end of it, I agreed to come back. So we came back about 6 months after that, and my experience meeting Maharaji was very different. Maharaji kind of took you where you were. He just accepted you where you were. And R.D. was a Buddhist and had already been practicing. I was a radical, and I had been fighting for civil rights and against the war in Vietnam, and was honored to get arrested with Martin Luther King fighting, marching. And I came in very angry about the injustices of the world, and I didn't have a spiritual tradition. And we got to Kenchi, where Maharaji was, and immediately Maharaji saw Girija and loved Girija, and he saw me and nothing. And I sort of expected a question like, how's Martin doing? You know, I expected something. I got absolutely nothing, and we went back to the hotel that night and came back the next day, and I got a little less of nothing. He didn't even notice me, didn't say hello. And after a week of nothing, I kind of felt like my wife had been captured by a cult. Everybody was touching his feet. I had some of the same Judeo-Christian aversion to idols, because they are idols that we fell in love with, idols. We touched Maharaji's feet, and we loved it. We didn't think we would. In fact, I was absolutely certain that I would hate touching his feet, and I avoided it until one day I decided that I wasn't going to stay, and Girija and I had a very difficult conversation because she was going to stay. And it meant something much more than just my leaving Maharaji and her staying. And I took the next day off, to think about it. And I walked around this lake. There's a lake in Nainital. Nainital means 9 lakes, but there's one lake particularly. And I walked around it, and I asked God what the hell I should do. Because I had zero feeling for this guy in a blanket, nothing. And he obviously reciprocated that feeling to me. And Girija was talking to him at an entirely different level. I couldn't understand the language. I didn't understand the songs. I didn't understand the gesture. And I wanted to get out. And we had a hard night. And the next morning I packed, and Girija said, aren't you going to go say goodbye to him? And I thought, well, you know, I mean, he may be a cult leader, and she may be in a cult, but I'm supposed to be polite, and of course I'm going to go say goodbye to him. And that morning we were lucky. We got a taxi, and it was the first taxi, and we were lucky, and we were the first ones into the ashram. And Maharaji used to sit on a tucket, which is a bed without a mattress, and he would come out of these 2 doors. Now, most of you are too young to remember Loretta Young, who used to come out on a television show by taking these twin doors and go like this. And that's the way Maharaji would come out. And we sat down by his tucket, because you asked me when I met him, and this is really when I met him, because the other stuff, in retrospect, didn't count. And on the tucket, the villagers and devotees had brought flowers and fruit, and they had arranged it in a mandala that said Ram, God's name, Ram. That's it, just simple fruit and flowers spelling Ram. And one of the apples had rolled off of the mandala and fallen on the ground. And I sat there, I trying to rehearse what I was going to say, my goodbye speech, you know. I'm not, you know, it was awkward. And I saw the apple, and I said, you know, God's name is incomplete. Ram is incomplete. I should at least pick up the damn apple and put it in to fill out the name Ram. You know probably what comes next. I leaned down, and I reached over to pick up the apple, and Maharaji came out. And he stepped on my hand, and he pinned me down. And it was more than awkward. It was painful, and I couldn't get my hand out. Right? couldn't get my hand out. And he looked down at me, none of these nice words, and he said to me, "You weren't here yesterday." We spoke Hindi, Giraj and I. And he said, "You weren't here yesterday. Where were you?" And this was really awkward. Maybe the thing that I wanted to do least in the world was to touch his feet. And now I'm touching his feet. And there's nothing elegant or spiritual about it. And then he said, "You weren't here yesterday. Where were you?" And he said, "Were you in the mountains?" And I said, "No." "No." He said, "Oh." And he used to do this thing sometimes to imitate like a television Swami. He would say, "Oh, I know. Were you at the lake?" And he spoke in Hindi, except that last word he said was in English. He said in Hindi, "lake." And my little antennas perked up, and I looked up at him. And a little bit like your experience, I thought, I don't quite know what comes next. And he said, "Were you horseback riding?" "No." "Were you fishing?" "Nobody would ever fish." "Swimming?" "No, you wouldn't have." He said, "Were you talking to God?" And I had been at the lake, and I had been so depressed at the thought of going a different direction than Girija, who I love so much, that I tried to find things to put into my head to get rid of the depression. You know, we didn't have Xanax. I looked for flowers to put into my head. And I said to God, "Could I have a sign, please? Doesn't have to be a big sign. I don't need a big McDonald's. It just doesn't have to be a big rainbow that, just something that I would see and no one else would see." Nothing. He and Maharaji had the same way of communicating. Nothing. So when Maharaji had me pinned down, he said, "You were talking to God." I realized that that was the first time in my adult life that I had prayed. And what I had prayed for was a sign. And Maharaji said, "Did you ask for a sign?" And a microwave oven will cook the brain exactly so much. And I just started to cry. And he started to smack me on the face and grab my beard. And then all the other satsangis who were there, the other devotees, came around and huddled. And I don't know where they were during what I thought was just this one-on-one with Maharaji, with Girija there cheering me on. I then realized, and they all hugged me, and we all kissed, and it was obvious that that was the initiation. It wasn't what I had read about. It wasn't that he gave me a name or a mantra, or that the initiation was some kind of a long march. It wasn't Milarepa. Where's Bob Thurman? It wasn't Milarepa building and then rebuilding the house that Marfa told him to do. It was to take myself to such depression, despair, the fear of loss, that I would actually pray. And that was my first meeting with Maharaji. Then immediately he said to me, "Will you write a book?" He said, "I tried it with Ram." No, he didn't.
But that was the first time I had ever thought of my mother in a spiritual way, in the same way. He probably had something to do with that. So you settled in And your Giraj is settled in. When did he notice you?
I think from then on, we had a very, such a sweet relationship. He gave me a name. He called me Dr. America, which was, it wasn't like Ram Dass, but it was something. And it was usually spoken like, Dr. America. And we would just play. It was always fun. Once he said, I have a headache, Dr. America, go get me some medicine. And I brought him some aspirins, and he put it on the top of his head, and he balanced, and he said, boy, this Western medicine is really wonderful. I feel better already. We had this... we had these leftover medicines that we had brought on the bus when we came across from England that we were going to take to Bangladesh because there had been this, when it was then East Pakistan, there was this terrible cyclone that killed 1 million people. And we couldn't get there because war broke out. And so I opened up a little clinic with Ravi Das, Mike Jeffrey, and Giraj and I, and we were treating villagers. And Maharaji used to tease me all the time about healing. And we talked a lot about healing as a pathway to God. And we talked about service all the time, about seva. And mostly we talked about Nishkam Karma Yoga, the yoga of working without attachment and dedicating that work to God and dedicating the results of that work to God. But it wasn't quite like, didactic. It wasn't that there was a course book and you'd read chapter 3 each day. It was, he would teach by anecdotes and by example.
Yeah. Are you getting the feeling that Gurudism, the Guru Kripa, isn't quite like the write in the books? We're two examples. It's funny. It's startling. It doesn't have any spiritual thing to it. And yet I got so taken, I don't know, that when I came back to America, I couldn't think of anything but Maharaji. It was so deep in my heart. It was the only spiritual thing that had happened to me, although I didn't call it spiritual. And though I didn't tell anybody where he was, I just told them about him. And they all found their way to India. and hundreds of people have been with him, Westerners. And some of the most peculiar Westerners. One jumped on Maharaji's back, naked. He's a businessman in the United States. Isn't he?
Every satsang has to have a black sheep.
and the satsang became very close friends. But then I looked at them and I think, what am I doing with this crowd? They were the most, I mean, I didn't know why he dragged them over, you know. But the thing was, he was looking at their souls. He wasn't looking at their incarnations. I hope they have good souls. Yeah. They pretty good. Yeah. So, Doctor, tell us about, he started to aim you. Instead of the Dr. America of the hog farm, what happened then?
Well, Girj and I had taken some Goenka courses, and we were, all balancing Hinduism and Buddhism, a little Islam, some Judaism, and a lot of Christianity for dessert. We were trying to figure all that stuff out, and every time I would sit in front of him and try to meditate, he would find a way to disturb that meditation. Of course, the one that I remember the most is he used to throw apples at me, particularly apples at my testicles. He seemed to have a good aim. But my meditation wasn't going very far, and he was the reason. And then one day, he called me and called Girija and had us sit in front of him in Vrindavan. And he said, how much money do you have? And I said, I have $500. He said, no, not here. Not what you brought to India. How much money do you have hidden away in America? And I thought about it, and I thought, probably another $500. He said, is that all you have? And that was all I had. And then he said, this is all in Hindi, he said, 500 here, 500 there. You are no doctor. Which is what my mother used to say to me. And then everything was in Hindi, and then he began chanting, you are no doctor, you are no doctor, you are no doctor, you are no doctor, UNO doctor, UNO doctor, UNO doctor ho jayega. You will become a United Nations organization doctor. And it all happened so quickly, and adroitly that I didn't get it. And then he said, you will go to villages and you will give vaccinations. He took out his arm. And I didn't get it. He said, you're going to leave the ashram, told Girija, you're going to go with the doctor. You're going to go to villages and give vaccinations against smallpox, which in Hindi is chechik. And he said, chechik unmulin ho jayega. Smallpox will be pulled out from the roots. Smallpox will be eradicated. This is God's gift to humanity, to lift this one form of suffering because of the hard work of dedicated health workers. And he didn't give me any other instructions. He didn't say, and you'll go on Thursday, and you'll meet this person. He just said, go, jiao, jiao, jiao. And we went to the World Health Organization. I mean, I had never seen a case of smallpox. I didn't know what smallpox was. I probably saw it in a book in medical school, but it wasn't important to American doctors. And I went to the World Health Organization, and I showed up at the front door, and I was wearing a white dress, ashram white gown, and I had hair down to the middle of my back and a beard to here, and they said, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm here to work for the smallpox eradication program. My guru who lives in the Himalayas said that smallpox is going to be eradicated. This is God's gift to humanity. It's true. It's true. As my friend Wavy Gravy would say, why make shit up? I mean, this was true. So they kicked me out. Girija and I went back to the ashram, which was, you had to take a rickshaw and a taxi and a bus and 17 hours. And we went to see Maharaj. He said, did you get your job yet? And I said, no. I probably said something like, no, Maharaji, He said, go back. Then I did feel like Marfa talking to Milarepa. And he sent me back, 12, 13, 14 times. Each one was 17 hours. Each time I got kicked out. Now, I did get a little smarter. I did lose the long beard, trimmed it, and somebody lent me a suit jacket, and I got rid of the dress. And, one day I walked in, and I walked into the big seating area, the waiting area, and by then I knew everybody. I knew the receptionist, Mrs. Boyer. She was an Anglo-Indian. I knew the HR person. He was very sympathetic, but they'd never hired a Westerner in India, and I was the youngest person that had ever applied for a job. And besides that, there was no smallpox program because Mrs. Gandhi didn't think it was a priority. But other than that, they were very nice. And this one time I walked in, and I sat in the waiting hall, and there was a big, tall American, looked like a football coach, and he said, hi, are you American? I said, yes. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm going to go. He said, are you a doctor? I said, yes, I am a doctor. He said, what are you doing? I said, my guru who lives in the Himalayas told me to come here because I'm supposed to work for the smallpox program because it's God's gift that smallpox will be eradicated because of the hard work of dedicated health workers. What do you do? He said, I'm the head of the smallpox program in Geneva, and I'm in charge of India, but we don't have a program yet. But if we ever do, maybe we'll call you. I'll just give you an interview right now. And he did, and he interviewed me. And months later, as these things happen, I got a telegram. Girija and I were in Kenshi, and the telegram was, you've been hired by WHO to go work in the smallpox program. Now, there was a lot of stuff in between about minor things like security checks and all those marches that I did before against the war in Vietnam, and, the fact that this was my first job out of medical school, and they'd never hired anybody so young, all those things. But I got to show Maharaji the telegram that I'd been hired by WHO, and, it was no big surprise to him, but it was a real big surprise to me. So I went to go work for the smallpox program, and Girija and I both worked in the program, and I'd never seen a case of smallpox. And I think they had to create a job category low enough so they could hire me. And I think they really hired me because I could type and I spoke Hindi. And after a while, the real docs who knew what they were doing, some didn't show up and they needed a substitute, and they gave me a district and then a division and then a state, and then I wound up running India. Giraj and I lived in India for 10 years. And for 2 of those years, or a year and a half, we got the greatest gig you could ever get in the world, which is during the week, we got to work to try to eradicate the worst disease in history. And on the weekends, we got to drive up to Kenshi and talk to Maharaji about it. And he would give us the best management advice I think anybody's ever had. And when I would have a problem with a corrupt Indian official, he would tell me what to do. When we didn't know what to do on getting people like the government interested, he would literally write a letter to the governor of Uttar Pradesh, Ali Akbar Khan, not the musician, and who happened to be his disciple, and write to him and say, I'm sending Larry to you, Dr. America, and help him with the smallpox program. And until 1974, Maharaji was my coach, mentor, besides being my guru. And it was the best time, I think, of our lives. The work was really hard. It was the hardest. But I've never been as good in my life doing anything as I was then, because I was doing it for him. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah. That last line, working for him, that's what I find. No matter what my occupation is, it's for him. It's for him. And this is kind of what Hanuman does for Ram. Hanuman is the monkey, and he works for Ram. He works for God. Do you work for God? It's really not bad. The working conditions are very slow. So what I do is look for souls that don't know that they are God. And then I just got to sidle up to them. I'm going to communicate what I know to them, soul to soul. And I do it for Maharaji. That's all. And sometimes somebody comes towards me, and I can see out of the corner of my eye that Maharaji's attracting this person. And we just interact. And the person gets a boost, whatever it is. I am Maharaji's Charlie McCarthy. I mean, Maharaji's working on them, and I just. And they say, "Oh, thank you, Maharaj." They say to me, "Thank you, Ram Das." You're welcome. I don't mind being the middleman. And you've gone on from smallpox. Is it with Maharaji's help?
Seva?
Yeah.
Seva. So when smallpox was eradicated, everybody went back to their own former jobs. Most of the people there had been delegated to work on smallpox from governments. They were professors, and I'd been delegated from Kenshi. And Maharaji wasn't anymore in his physical body. So Girij and I decided that we would go back to the United States and maybe learn something about public health, since we'd been doing it, but had never had a course in it. And we wound up at the University of Michigan, and Girij got her PhD in public health, and I became a professor. And we were teaching public health. And we wrote an article in a magazine, and the article was called "Death for a Killer Disease," about how smallpox was eradicated. But we wanted to write about how we had experienced it, which meant we wrote about a pretty unusual cast of characters, not just regular doctors. We wrote about Ram Das and Wavy and Nicole Grasset, who had been my boss, and all the people that we had met who, in the smallpox program, particularly the Indian, wonderful, wonderful Indians who had worked in the program and dedicated so much of their life to helping eradicate smallpox. So we wrote this article, and it was published, and some people sent us money. Steve Jobs was one of them. He sent us $5,000. He had come to visit Maharaji, as some of you know, but he got there late after Maharaji had left his body. And Steve sent us a computer, and I didn't know what to do with this money. Girija didn't know what to do with this money. So we decided we would call together all the people that we had written about in this article and ask them what to do about this money, and it was about $40,000. And so we had this meeting in near Ann Arbor in Walden Woods, and Ram Das was the straight man. He really wrote about it as, like taking the minutes of a meeting, and the head of WHO communications, who was there, who was the straight man, wrote poetry. We all played different roles. It was quite extraordinary. And I wanted us to, we all decided we were going to start an organization, a nonprofit, and that we were going to go after another disease after smallpox. And I wanted to go after childhood diarrhea because it was the major killer at that time. Wavy immediately said, "I'll put on a concert, a rock and roll benefit to get rid of diarrhea, and we'll call the concert No Shit." I thought that would really bring in lots of people. It just, I don't know, Mark, about the branding of that name, but it really appealed to me. So, Nicole Grasset was there, and this French Swiss woman who we used to call a Dior a whirlwind on wearing a Dior dress or something like that. She was extraordinary. And if you ask me later, I'll tell you some of the legendary fights between Ram Dass and Nicole Grasset. We used to call them the doobie, doobie, doobie. You know, the bee and the do. But at this meeting, the founding meeting of Seva, Seva is now almost 35 years old, and Seva's projects have given back sight to more than 3 million blind people. But if you had been at that meeting, you would have doubted that that organization would have survived the next day, let alone gone on.
I was sitting at the table, and this man came in with a dispatch case and tie and jacket, and he looked around, and right across from him was Wavy, who was dressed in a clown. And the guy immediately figured he must be at the wrong something. And it was all a mixed bag, all those doctors and hog farmers and us spiritual people. Well, they were spiritual too, but they didn't know it. And we had a go at it. This Nicole, this woman, French doctor, and she wanted to just go ahead. And I said, it's matter how we do it. It's how we do it, not that we do it. She said, I'll give my soul up for one blind person that can see. I said, well, I won't.
That sort of brackets it. Ram Dass said, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, what profiteth ye if you gain the world and lose your soul? What difference does it make if you get rid of blindness in the world but lose your soul? And Nicole shot back instantly and said, what difference does it make if I lose my soul and burn in hell if I haven't done anything for the blind in the world? And that encompassed the debate that went on for about 20 years.
But I found myself lecturing about blindness.
Every time we would run out of money, which was often, I don't know how many of you read Animal Farm? Remember Boxer? Remember the horse who said, I must work harder, I must work harder. Every time we ran out of money, we didn't say it exactly like, let's send Ram Dass on the road again, but it was something like that. And he would go out on the road and he would give all those lectures. I don't know if you remember, those of you who are of a certain age, all those lectures that he did, sometimes a 20 or a 30 city lecture for Seva. All that money that was raised, he didn't take a penny. It all went for Seva. And Wavy would put on these rock and roll concerts. Grateful Dead was our house band. And we would put on all these rock and roll concerts, and all that money went to Seva. And we made a huge mistake in branding. Now I know we never should have called Seva a foundation, because when you say that, it makes it sound like you have money. But we were, and Seva's doing really well, folks, so it's doing really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Seva means service. Service good to God. Yeah. you want to on from the seva?
I was working at Seva. We were all working at Seva, and then the tsunami happened in Indonesia, the earthquake that occurred in Indonesia, and the tsunami happened. And because Seva had been working in India and in Southeast Asia, people sent us money. And I didn't feel comfortable just giving that money to NGOs who were working in Sri Lanka, where there was a tremendous accident. I don't know if you remember that train that rolled over in a place called Hikkaduwa. But I thought I'd take that money and I'd go and I'd work in the refugee camps, and I would actually give that money to people who were doing wonderful things. And I found some amazing people, some Vedanta groups and some Buddhist groups just doing wonderful things. So I went to India and then went to Sri Lanka. And then I got involved in the polio eradication program and worked there for a while. We lived in India. And then I came back, and a big surprise to me, I got this TED Prize. And the fellow who started TED told me to go and talk in Silicon Valley at different computer companies who were supporters of TED and see if they would support my wish. When you get a TED Prize, you have a wish, and my wish was to help prevent pandemics. And I gave a talk at Google, and I didn't know it, but Larry and Sergey and Eric Schmidt, the founders of Google and the CEO, were in the audience. And after I gave the talk, I got a phone call from Sheryl Sandberg, who's now the chief operating officer at Facebook, and she said, "Would you like to come work for Google?" And I thought, no. I mean, no. I didn't go work for a company. But then I found out about Google, and I took that job, and I started Google's nonprofit stuff, google.org and the Google Foundation. And then I was there for a number of years, and then this fellow, Jeff Skoll, who was the founder of eBay, asked me if I would like to come and help him start a foundation working on pandemics and global threats and water and nuclear proliferation and the Middle East crisis. And I thought we could fix all those in 2-3 months. And then go on to the really hard things like selfishness and greed. And I've been there for 3 years now, and I love it. And Jeff is really a wonderful guy. I took him to Kenshi. I took him to Maharaj's ashram, and he met Siddhima, who is running Maharaj's ashram. And Siddhima said that he was a saint in training.
Saint in training.
So I like him very much.
Yeah. See, this is what happened from you are no doctor. The Guru said, and look at he's now pandemics.
Causing them. No.
God. Yeah, I feel that service is one of the most beautiful paths to the spiritual path. I mean, he's been just serving and serving and serving and serving. See, so we had the music and kirtan. And that was one form of getting to God. And boy, that is such a wow. Ram, 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 Ram. Just, oh God. You bathe in it. You bathe in it. And here's one which is service. And also, besides service, we've talked a lot about Maharaji. Guru Kripa. Guru Kripa, which means grace of the Guru. And my stroke is just, my body's stroke is just another happening, because I have Maharaji. And I have Maharaji in a way that I realize his presence, like in this moment. He's present in this moment. But then I know he's present. Then I can sit down and talk to him. Some guy came up to me and said, "You're talking about your dead guru." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's your imagination." I said, "Well, yes. My guru is in my imagination. He gets it. We have such amazing. And I think everybody that I've met who's heard about Maharaji, just heard about him, that every time they think about him, they get his kripa, his grace. So I see all these who say Maharaji in a dream or a vision or in a book, and they've got him as much as we've got him. It's extraordinary when you see that your whole incarnation is karma, certainly, but it is also grace. It is also grace. I said to Maharaji, aren't karma and grace the same thing? He says, I won't answer this publicly. What's that mean? So he said to an Indian man, Ramdas and I understand each other perfectly. Karma and grace are the same. the karma you're going through is the grace. It's the grace. And that's a very far out thing. And we, in this culture, and this moment in history, experience the grace. The grace of the everybody's saying war, but I've got to say that suffering sharpens your shovel in digging down deep, looking for the oversoul, the one inside of us. Every single one of you has the one inside of you. It's the guiding principle that's guiding your life. And it's the same one in all of us. And so we're like fingers for the one, fingers of consciousness. All of us. We are almost always, for the culture we are in, there is the ego here. It's who we think we are, right here. That's what you think I is. And from that to this is a major thing. This is identification from this to this. When you die is just this. And doing sadhana is just this. Now, this one, I repeat, I am loving awareness. Living awareness is the spiritual heart. Loving awareness. Loving awareness. I am 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 loving awareness. It moves you to the heart. Loving awareness. And if you can identify with that loving awareness, the whole world opens up. Because this is This is all that psychological ugh. And this is only love. It's only love. The first time the identification, I looked around. See, Maharaji had set me up. He said, Ramdas, I want you to love everybody. I said, Maharaji, I can't do that. Ramdas, I want you to love everybody. But Maharaji, there are things that I can't love George Bush. So he said, love everybody. And I went back and thought, I can't love George's incarnation, but I can love his soul, which I feel so sorry for. And therefore, I love everybody. Everybody has a pure soul. Down here. Now, the word soul, it's misunderstood. You think of it as a thing. It's another plane of consciousness. You can't operate and find the soul, but you know when you have got it. There's the way I think of it, ego, soul, that's the individual soul. That's something Buddhists don't buy. And then it goes from individual soul to the next thing, the next plane of consciousness, which goes to the one. So I think Maharaji is that third plane of consciousness. So he is love. I'm the second plane of consciousness. The individual, I'm still looking at the love. I'm yet haven't identified. Do you see the difference? Do you remember, Larry? Just when you sat in front of Maharaji, I published it a lot.
It wasn't such a surprise to me that sitting in front of Maharaji that he loved everybody in the world. That was his job. The surprise to me is that when I sat in front of him, I loved everybody in the world. And that was the transformation. They say that the guru is like a philosopher's stone, which takes lead and changes it into gold, changes the leaden soul into a golden soul. But the Guru is more than the philosopher's stone because it can change your lead into another philosopher's stone.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, pretty good. We are music. Music. We'll have a little music, which is a capping of this bhakti evening. I wish for you grace. Grace in your lives. Wow. Yeah. I think we move when they come up.
विकट रूप धरि लंक जरा भीम रूप धरि असुर संहार रामचंद्र के काज सवार लाय सजीवन लखन जियाय श्री रघुवीर हर्षि उर लाय रघुपति कीन्ही बहुत बड़ाई मम प्रिय भरतन सम सहस बदन मनोज सगाई इस भई श्रीमति मंगल गाई सनकादिक ब्रह्मादि मुनीस नारद शारद सहित अहीस काल जहाँ कवि गोविंद कह सके कहाँ तुम उपकार सुग्रीवन की राम मिलाय राजपद दीनी तुम्हारो मंत्र विभीषण मां लंकेश्वर भय सब जग जान युग सहस्र योजन पर भार नील्योताहि मधुर फल जान मुद्रिका मिले मुखमाय जलधि लांघि गए अचरज नाहि दुर्गम काज जगत के जेते सुगमानुग्रह तुम्हारे तेते राम दुआरे तुम रखवारे होत न आज्ञा बिन पैसारे सब सुख लगे तुम्हारी शरण तुम रक्षक काहू को डरना आपन तेज समारो आप तीनों लोक हांकते कांपे भूत पिशाच निकट नहीं लागे महावीर जब नाम सुनाए नासे रोग हरे सब पीर जपत निरंतर हनुमत वीर संकट से हनुमान छुड़ाए मन क्रम भजन ध्यान जो लाए सब पर राम तपस्वी राज तिनके काज सकल तुम साज और मनोरथ जो कोय लाए सोए अमित जीवन फल पाए चारों युग परताप तुम्हारे हे प्रसिद्ध जगत जियारे साधु संत के तुम रखवारे असुर निकंदन राम दुलारे अष्ट सिद्धि नौ निधि के दान असवर दीन जानकी मात राम रसायन तुम्हारे पास सदा रहो रघुपति के दास तुम्हारे भजन राम को पाओ जन्म जन्म के दुख बिसराओ अंत काल रघुवर पुर जाय जहाँ Namaste. Thank you. And thanks again to Genevieve and Arjun.